The air in the first-class lounge of JFK was thick with the scent of roasted espresso and expensive perfume. But to Brittany, it felt like oxygen was running out. She sat in a plush velvet armchair, her back straight, her tailored cream blazer hugging her curves in a way that screamed executive. At 29, Brittany was the woman corporations called when they wanted to change the world's perception of a brand. She was a powerhouse. She was a lioness. But as she reached into her designer tote, her fingers brushed against a piece of cardstock that made her heart stutter. She pulled it out, a save-the-date card. It was elegant, minimalist, and cruel. Mark and Tiffany. I stopped believing in fairy tales the day my ex told me I didn't look the part of a CEO's wife, she whispered to the empty lounge. The words still tasted like ash. Mark hadn't left her because she wasn't smart enough or successful enough. She had literally built his brand from the ground up. He had left her because, in his words, his public image required a certain aesthetic. A slender, delicate partner to balance his power. She looked at her reflection in the darkened screen of her phone. She was a plus-size woman who moved with the grace of a queen. But in that moment, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. With a sharp, decisive motion, she tore the card in half and dropped it into the crystal ashtray. She was going to Seoul. She was going to lead the biggest marketing merger of the decade. She didn't need a fairy tale. She needed a win. 200 yards away, in the flight operations deck, Captain Ye-jun adjusted the gold bars on his shoulders, his face a mask of practiced indifference. To the crew of Sky K Airlines, he was a legend, the youngest captain in the fleet, a man who navigated turbulence with the precision of a surgeon. To the world outside the cockpit, he was the reluctant heir to the Sky K empire. The board is meeting 3 hours after we touch down in Incheon, Captain, his co-pilot whispered, checking his tablet. Your cousin, Jun-ho, has been lobbying the shareholders. He's telling them you're distracted by your love for the cockpit. He wants the chairmanship. Ye-jun's jaw tightened. He gripped the flight yoke, the cold metal familiar and honest. In the air, the physics don't lie. You either fly or you fall. In the boardroom, everyone lies even when they're standing still. He hated the suits. He hated the fake smiles and the way his family treated people like chess pieces. Here, 30,000 feet above the hypocrisy, he felt alive. He pulled his flight mask up, checking the seal. He didn't want to be a CEO. He wanted to be a pilot. But he knew that if he didn't fight, the airline his father built would be gutted by the vultures, starting with Jun-ho. Let's get them to Seoul safely, Ye-jun said, his voice dropping into that dangerously calm register that commanded instant leonine respect. I'll deal with the vultures on the ground. Flight SK-001, first class cabin. Brittany found seat 1A. It was a sanctuary of leather and wood grain. She sank into the seat, closing her eyes, trying to manifest the powerhouse Brittany who didn't cry over men who didn't deserve her. Peace, she thought. Just 14 hours of peace. I don't care what the legal team says. Fire them. The silence of the cabin was shattered by a nasal, piercing roar. A man in a suit that cost more than a small car marched down the aisle, a phone pressed to his ear. He was middle-aged, sharp-featured, and radiating a sense of unearned importance. This was Jun-ho. He didn't even look at the flight attendant trying to take his coat. He simply dropped it on the floor for her to pick up. He reached seat 1B, the seat directly next to Brittany, and stopped. He stopped talking into the phone. He looked down at Brittany, his eyes raking over her with a slow, deliberate sneer. It wasn't just a look of annoyance. It was a look of profound, elitist disgust. I'll call you back, Jun-ho snapped into the phone, his eyes never leaving Brittany. I have an administrative issue to handle first. He turned to the lead flight attendant, his voice loud enough to make the other 3 passengers in the cabin look up. "You've made a mistake," Junho said, pointing a manicured finger at Brittany as if she were a spill on the carpet. "I pay for first class for the space and the prestige. I'm a board member of this airline. Why is this person in my row? I can't be expected to fly 14 hours squeezed in next to that." Brittany felt the blood drain from her face. The aesthetic comment from her ex flashed in her mind like a neon sign. The wound she thought she'd buried ripped wide open in the middle of a crowded plane. She looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs as Junho's sneer deepened. The peace she had prayed for was gone. The nightmare was just beginning. The cabin of SK-001, usually a sanctuary of hushed luxury and the clinking of crystal, had become a theater of cruelty. Junho stood in the aisle, his face twisted in an expression of theatrical distress, as if the very air around seat 1A had been tainted. He turned to the lead flight attendant, a young woman named Min-Ah, who was now trembling under his gaze. "I am a platinum-tier shareholder and a sitting board member," Junho barked, loud enough to ensure the passengers in the rows behind them were leaning into the aisle to listen. "I pay for this seat because I require space. I require standards. Look at this. How am I supposed to work? How am I supposed to breathe when I'm being crowded by excess baggage?" The words hit Brittany like a physical blow. Excess baggage. She felt the heat rise from her neck to her cheeks, a searing brand of shame. She was used to boardroom battles where she was the smartest person in the room. But this wasn't about her intellect. This was a targeted strike on her worth as a human being. The memory of Mark's voice, "You just don't fit the aesthetic, Brittany," echoed so loudly she thought her ears might bleed. "Sir," Minna stammered, her voice small, "the passenger has a valid ticket. The seat is hers." "Then move her to economy," Junho laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "She'll fit right in back there. Or better yet, put her in the cargo hold. She certainly takes up enough room for it." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one spoke. No one defended her. Brittany's vision blurred. Her hand, trembling, reached for the buckle of her seatbelt. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't be the problem for one more second. I'll move," Brittany whispered, her voice thick. She began to stand, her head bowed, her eyes stinging with the salt of unshed tears. She felt small. She felt exactly like the placeholder Mark had called her. The heavy cockpit door swung open. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her. It wasn't the shadow of a flight attendant or another angry passenger. It was broad, imposing, and carried the faint, crisp scent of ozone and expensive sandalwood. Captain Yejun stepped into the cabin. He looked like a god of the sky in his midnight blue uniform, the gold braid on his sleeves catching the light. He was wearing his flight mask, obscuring the lower half of his face, but his eyes, dark, piercing, and cold as the stratosphere, were fixed entirely on seat 1A. He didn't look at Junho. He didn't acknowledge the man's existence. Yejun walked straight to Brittany. As she hovered between sitting and standing, trapped in her own humiliation, he reached out a gloved hand and gently, firmly, pressed it against the armrest of her seat, signaling her to stay. Then, he did something that made the entire cabin gasp. He knelt. One knee hit the plush carpet of the first-class cabin as he brought himself down to Brittany's eye level. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and unhooked his flight mask. His face was striking. Sharp, masculine features, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and eyes that held a depth of unexpected empathy. He looked at Brittany, really looked at her, seeing past the blazer and the executive title to the wounded woman underneath. "Ma'am," his voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. Is this man bothering you? Junho scoffed, finding his voice. Bothering her? Yejun, what are you doing? Don't play pilot hero right now. I'm the one being inconvenienced. This woman is occupying half the row. Tell her to move. Yejun finally turned his head. He didn't stand up. He remained kneeling by Brittany, his gaze shifting to Junho with a terrifying glacial calm. Mr. Park, Yejun said, his voice dropping an octave, you are currently interfering with the duties of the flight crew and creating a hostile environment for a passenger. Under aviation law, that makes you a safety risk. A safety risk? I own a piece of this airline, Junho screamed. Yejun stood up then, unfolding his tall frame like a predator rising from the grass. He towered over his cousin. In the boardroom, you have a voice. On this aircraft, I am the law. I am the captain, and I will not have my passengers insulted. He turned to Mina, who was watching him with wide, idolizing eyes. Mina, Yejun commanded. Since Mr. Park is so concerned about his breathing room and the standards of this row, please escort him to the very last row of the aircraft. Seat 44E, the one right next to the aft lavatory. I believe the smell of the holding tank will suit his personality perfectly. You can't do that, Junho shrieked, his face turning a mottled purple. I'm a board member. I'll have your wings for this. Yejun stepped into Junho's personal space, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of a mountain. Then you can file that complaint from the back of the plane. Move, now, or I will have the air marshals restrain you for the duration of the flight. The bravado drained out of Junho. He looked around the cabin, realizing no one, not even the other elite passengers, was going to help him. They were all looking at him with the same disgust he had shown Brittany. With a final, incoherent snarl, Junho grabbed his designer briefcase and was marched toward the back of the plane by two stern-faced attendants. The cabin fell into a different kind of silence, a respectful, stunned quiet. Yejun turned back to Brittany. The hardness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a soft, searching look. Stay in your seat, Monsieur. Brittany, she breathed, her heart still racing, but the tears had retreated. Brittany, he repeated, her name sounding like a song in his deep accent. Don't move. You belong exactly where you are. He gave her a curt, professional nod, but his eyes lingered on hers for a fraction of a second too long before he turned and disappeared back into the cockpit. Brittany sat back, her hands no longer shaking. For the first time in years, someone hadn't seen her as a problem to be managed. They had seen her as someone worth protecting. The cabin lights had dimmed to a soft, ethereal violet, mimicking the deep twilight of the stratosphere. Most of the first-class passengers were tucked under their silk duvets, the rhythmic hum of the Boeing 777 acting as a high-altitude lullaby. Brittany, however, was wide awake. Her laptop screen glowed, a spreadsheet of market projections mocking her. She couldn't focus. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the sting of Junho's words and the weight of the entire cabin's gaze. She felt like an exhibit, a problem that had been solved by a handsome pilot, rather than a woman who belonged there. A soft chime announced the opening of the flight deck door. She didn't look up, assuming it was a flight attendant doing their rounds. Then, a steaming ceramic mug was placed gently on the mahogany side table of her suite. It wasn't the standard airline dishware. It was a handcrafted celadon cup, smelling of roasted grain and honey. It's Hunmi cha, brown rice tea, a familiar low voice said. It's my personal stash. Better for the nerves than the burnt coffee they serve back there. Brittany looked up. Yejun had changed. He had shed his heavy captain's jacket and tie, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that spoke of hidden strength. Without the hat and the mask, he looked younger, but his eyes were weary, laden with a heavy, regal exhaustion. Brittany's defense mechanisms, honed by years of corporate infighting and a brutal breakup, snapped into place. She didn't reach for the tea. Instead, she tightened her grip on her laptop. "Is this part of the plus-size customer recovery protocol?" she asked, her voice laced with a sharp defensive edge. "The captain comes down from his throne to make sure the humiliated passenger doesn't sue the airline?" Yejun didn't flinch. He didn't offer a corporate apology. Instead, he pulled out the small ottoman seat opposite her, the one meant for guests to dine together, and sat down. He was now just inches away in the semi-darkness. "There is no protocol for what happened today," he said quietly. "There's only a man who saw someone being treated poorly and a captain who doesn't tolerate cowards on his flight." "You don't have to stay," Brittany said, looking back at her screen, though the numbers were blurring. "I'm fine. I've heard worse than excess baggage before. I'm a big girl, Captain. I've got thick skin." "Does it ever get tired?" Yejun asked. The question was so unexpected, Brittany finally looked at him. "What?" "The skin," he clarified, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Being thick. Always being the one who has to be strong, because people think your size or your success means you don't feel the thorns." He looked out the window at the endless, star-dusted blackness. "I fly because up here, I'm just a soul in a machine. The clouds don't care about my family name. They don't judge me for what I am, only for how I fly." Brittany felt a lump form in her throat. She looked at the tea, the steam curling into the cool air. "I'm tired of being a placeholder, Captain. That's what I told myself when I boarded this plane. In my last relationship, I was the smart one, the one who did the work. But I was just a temporary stop until he found the trophy. The girl who looked like she belonged on a billboard. Men like you. Successful. Perfect. You're nice until you're bored. I'm done being the girl someone stays with until the perfect version comes along." She expected him to offer a platitude. She expected him to stand up and return to his duties, awkwarded out by her honesty. Instead, Yejun reached out. He didn't touch her hand. He knew better than to invade her space. But he moved the tea closer, a silent gesture of care. He waited until she met his gaze. The cabin light caught the amber flecks in his dark eyes, and for a moment, the hum of the engine seemed to fade into a heartbeat. "The man you were with was a fool who looked at a diamond and complained about its weight," Yejun said, his voice absolute and unwavering. He leaned in closer, his presence orbiting around her, creating a private sanctuary in the middle of the sky. "I spend my life surrounded by perfect people, Brittany. They are like paper, thin, flat, and easily torn. I have no interest in trophies." He paused, his gaze intensifying until she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the plane's air conditioning. "I don't see a placeholder in this seat. I see the only person on this plane worth talking to." Brittany's breath hitched. For the first time in a long time, the wall didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a cage. And as Yejun watched her with a look of genuine, searing interest, she found herself reaching for the tea. The wheels of the Boeing 777 kissed the tarmac of Incheon International Airport with a precision that was almost supernatural. There was no jolt, no bounce, just the smooth, heavy transition from the freedom of the clouds to the cold reality of the earth. As the "fasten seatbelt" sign extinguished with a polite ding, the silence of the first-class cabin was instantly incinerated. Jun-ho, who had spent the last 10 hours stewing in the back of the plane near the engine's roar and the scent of the lavatory, came charging forward. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his face was a mask of pure, concentrated malice. He didn't even wait for the jet bridge to fully connect before he was hovering by the cockpit door. Brittany stood, pulling her carry-on from the overhead bin. Her heart hammered. The peace of the tea and the deep conversation with Yejun felt like a dream she was waking up from too quickly. The cockpit door swung open. Ye-jun stepped out, adjusting his pilot's cap, his face once again unreadable behind the professional mask. "Good landing, driver," Junho sneered, loud enough for the departing passengers to hear. He adjusted his cufflinks with a trembling, arrogant hand. "Enjoy the view from the tarmac while you can. By the time the sun sets, I'll have the board's vote. You'll be lucky if I let you fly a crop duster in the countryside. Now, get out of my way. The real bosses have work to do." Ye-jun didn't move. He didn't even look at his cousin. He simply checked his watch. "You're right, Junho. Timing is everything." The cabin door groaned open. Junho shoved past the flight attendants, stepping onto the jet bridge with a triumphant stride. He saw the crowd waiting at Gate 12, a phalanx of men in sharp charcoal suits, several high-ranking airport officials, and 4 officers from the Seoul Metropolitan Police. Junho straightened his tie, a smirk spreading across his face. "Ah, the welcoming committee. A bit much, even for me, but appropriate." He raised a hand to greet the lead board member. "Director Kang, you're early. Let's get to the office and finish this." Director Kang didn't look at Junho. He didn't even blink. Instead, he and the dozen other executives stepped aside, clearing a path. Ye-jun stepped off the plane. In one fluid motion, Ye-jun reached up and removed his pilot's cap, tucking it under his arm. As if on a single invisible string, every executive, director, and official at the gate bent their bodies into a deep 90-degree bow. The sound of their collective movement was like a whip crack in the silent terminal. "Chairman Ye-jun, welcome home," they spoke in a booming, unified chorus. Junho's hand stayed frozen in midair. His jaw dropped so low it looked unhinged. "Chairman, what is this? He's a pilot. He's a servant." Ye-jun walked forward, his stride no longer that of a pilot, but of a king. He stopped directly in front of Director Kang, but his eyes were on the police officers. "Director?" Ye-jun's voice was like ice hitting glass. "This man, Junho Park, used his position on the board to harass a passenger, create a hostile environment for my crew, and intentionally breach safety protocols by refusing to follow crew instructions during taxiing." Ye-jun turned slightly, his gaze finding Brittany, who was standing at the threshold of the jet bridge, frozen. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. "He is a liability to the reputation of Sky K Airlines and a danger to its culture," Ye-jun continued. "Strip him of his emergency shares immediately. He is removed from the board, effective as of the landing gear touching the ground." "You can't do this," Junho screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail as the police officers stepped forward. "I have rights. I am family." "You are a bully," Ye-jun said, his voice dangerously low. "And on my airline, bullies don't get seats. They get escorted out." The officers grabbed Junho's arms. The metallic click of handcuffs echoing through the gate was the most satisfying sound Brittany had ever heard. The man who had called her excess baggage was now being dragged away like a common criminal, screaming about his status until his voice faded down the terminal. The vindication was a rush of pure dopamine, a roar of justice that should have made Brittany cheer. But as the director swarmed around Ye-jun, handing him tablets and briefing him on the afternoon's agenda, the reality hit her. The man who had knelt at her feet, the man who had shared his personal tea and his private heart with her. He wasn't just a pilot looking for a connection. He was the sun that this entire corporate galaxy revolved around. Ye-jun looked up, his eyes searching the crowd until they locked onto hers. He started to move toward her, a soft, apologetic look breaking through his chairman's mask. "Brittany," he began, reaching out. She took a sharp step back, her eyes filling with a different kind of pain. "You're the chairman," she whispered, the betrayal tasting like copper in her mouth. "The whole time, you were the one in charge. You lied." I didn't lie about how I felt, he pleaded, but the suits were already closing in around him, separating them. Brittany didn't stay to hear the rest. She turned and vanished into the crowd of the terminal, her heart heavier than it had been when she boarded the plane. To her, this wasn't a fairy tale. It was just another powerful man playing a very elaborate game. The fluorescent lights of Incheon International Airport felt like an interrogation. Brittany moved through the terminal with her head down, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every time she saw a Sky K logo on a digital billboard, a lounge door, or the lapel of a passing employee, she felt a fresh wave of nausea. He owns the airline. The words echoed in her mind, mocking the vulnerability she had shown in the dim light of the cabin. She had told him her deepest fears. She had admitted she felt like a placeholder. And all the while, he had been sitting there, the hidden monarch of a multi-billion-dollar empire, likely pitying the relatable commoner who had caught his eye for a few hours. It was a game, she whispered, her voice trembling as she reached the taxi stand. A high-altitude social experiment. She slammed the door of the taxi. The Sheila Soul. Fast, please. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the glass facade of the airport. She didn't see a hero. She saw a man who had built a throne out of secrets. To Brittany, Mark had been a man who wanted a trophy. Yejun was a man who wanted a pet project. Both were versions of a lie she was no longer willing to live. Gate 12. VIP holding area. Chairman, the cars are waiting. The victory dinner with the primary shareholders is set for 7 p.m., Director Kang said, his voice urgent as he trotted beside Yejun. Junho's supporters are already folding. This is the moment to solidify your transition. You need to be seen. Yejun stopped mid-stride. He wasn't listening. He was staring at the exit where a shock of curly hair and a cream blazer had just vanished into the sea of travelers. The adrenaline of the boardroom coup had vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. He had spent years dreaming of the moment he would finally strip Junho of his power. But now that it had happened, it felt like ash. The only thing that mattered was the look of pure, unadulterated betrayal in Brittany's eyes before she fled. Cancel the dinner, Yejun said, his voice flat. Director Kang gasped. Sir, you can't. The shareholders. I don't care about the shareholders, Yejun snapped, turning a gaze on the director that made the older man flinch. I want her location. Check the passenger manifest. Check the ground transport logs and call every 5-star hotel in the city. Now. Chairman, this is highly irregular. She is just a passenger. Yejun stepped closer, his presence darkening. She is the only person who looked at me today and didn't see a title or a threat. She saw me, and I let her walk away thinking I'm a liar. Find her, or consider your own seat on the board vacant. The Sheila Soul, 6:30 p.m. Brittany walked toward the check-in desk, her shoulders aching from the weight of her bags and the emotional exhaustion of the day. All she wanted was a hot shower, a room service club sandwich, and to cry until she fell asleep. Name? The receptionist asked with a polished smile. Brittany Williams. I have a reservation for a deluxe king. The receptionist's fingers flew across the keyboard. Suddenly, the woman's eyes widened. She stood up and bowed deeply. So deeply her forehead nearly touched the counter. Ms. Williams, we have been expecting you. Please forgive our delay. Your suite is ready. Brittany frowned. Delay? My suite? I just booked a standard room. Oh, no, ma'am, the receptionist said, signaling to a manager who appeared out of nowhere to take Brittany's bags. The chairman of Sky K called personally 20 minutes ago. Your reservation has been upgraded to the presidential penthouse. The entire top floor has been cleared for your privacy. All expenses are prepaid by the chairman's private office. The blood rushed to Brittany's face, but it wasn't the heat of gratitude. It was the fire of indignation. He was doing it again. He was using his power to surround her, to manage her, to put her in a golden cage where he knew exactly where to find her. To him, this was a grand gesture. To her, it was a tracking device made of marble and silk. I didn't ask for an upgrade, Brittany said, her voice shaking with rage. It is our honor, Miss Williams. The chairman also requested that the kitchen prepare a specific roasted grain tea for your arrival. Cancel the room, Brittany interrupted, her voice loud enough to make the other guests turn. I beg your pardon, the manager stammered. I am checking out, Brittany said, grabbing her suitcase handle so hard her knuckles turned white. I don't care if it's prepaid. I don't care if it's the penthouse. Tell your chairman that he can't buy a second chance with a room key. I'm not his guest, and I'm certainly not his project. She turned on her heel and marched back toward the sliding glass doors, her heart breaking all over again. She was in a foreign city. It was getting dark, and she had nowhere to stay. But for the first time in her life, she was walking away from the perfect man before he had the chance to leave her. But as she stepped out onto the curb, a black sedan pulled up. The door opened, and Yejun stepped out. He wasn't wearing his pilot's uniform. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie, and an expression of such raw, desperate longing that for a second, Brittany's resolve flickered. Brittany, he said, his voice a plea. Please, just let me explain why I didn't tell you. I don't need an explanation, she snapped, her eyes flashing. I've seen this movie before, Yejun. The powerful man plays at being normal until he gets bored. Well, I'm bored now. Get out of my way. The neon sign of the 24-hour convenience store flickered, casting a rhythmic blue glow over the damp pavement of a quiet Seoul side street. Brittany sat on a cracked plastic stool at a wobbly table, clutching a warm can of coffee she'd bought for 1,201. She'd spent the last 2 hours wandering, eventually checking into a modest, clean boutique hotel. She was exhausted. Her feet ached, and her heart felt like it had been through a paper shredder. She just wanted to disappear into the anonymity of the city. A soft scuff of sneakers on the pavement made her stiffen. She didn't look up. If you're a mugger, I've had a really bad day. Just take the bag and leave the coffee. I'm not a mugger, a quiet, familiar voice replied, though I suppose, in your eyes, I've stolen something much worse. Brittany looked up. Her breath hitched. Standing by the rack of umbrellas was Yejun. Gone was the crisp pilot's uniform. Gone was the hand-tailored Italian suit of the chairman. He was wearing a plain charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and beat-up running shoes. His hair, usually styled to perfection, was damp from the light drizzle and falling over his forehead. He looked younger. He looked vulnerable. Most importantly, he was alone. No black sedans, no earpiece-wearing security, no Director Kang. How did you find me? She asked, her voice flat. I have my way, he said, and I assumed that since you were hiding from me, you wouldn't go to another 5-star hotel. You'd go somewhere. Real. He stepped toward the entrance, disappeared inside for a moment, and emerged with his own can of cheap coffee. He didn't ask for permission. He simply sat on the plastic stool opposite her. The table was so small their knees brushed. Brittany tried to pull back, but there was nowhere to go. You have 5 minutes, she said, staring at her can. Then I'm calling a taxi. Yejun cracked the tab on his coffee. The sharp hiss was the only sound in the quiet alley. Do you know what people see when they look at me, Brittany? They see a bank account. They see a seat on a board. They see a legacy. From the moment I wake up until the moment I sleep, I am the heir. Every smile given to me is a transaction. Every "how are you" is an opening for a request. He looked at her then, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering neon. When I stepped into that cabin and saw you, for the first time in years, I wasn't the chairman. To you, I was just a pilot. And when we sat in the dark and talked about fears and placeholders, you weren't looking for a promotion. You weren't looking for a stock tip. You were just looking at me. It didn't feel like two people meeting for the first time. So you lied to protect your genuine experience? Brittany countered, her voice trembling. You let me vent about my insecurities while you sat on a throne of secrets. That's not a connection, Yejun. That's an audience. I didn't lie to trick you, he said, leaning forward. His voice was a low, desperate vibration. I hid because I was terrified that if you knew who I was, you'd stop looking at me the way you did. I wanted, just for one flight, to be a man who was seen because of his character, not his net worth. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers on the cold plastic table. He didn't touch her, leaving the choice to her. The world sees my money, he whispered. My cousin sees my seat. You were the only one who just saw me. Please, don't walk away because I have a title I never asked for. Brittany looked at the man in the hoodie. He looked nothing like the CEO's husband Mark had tried to be. He looked like a man who was lonely in a room full of people. She thought about the save the date card she'd torn up. Mark had wanted her to fit a mold. Yejun seemed to be begging her to help him break his. She took a slow, shaky breath. The anger was still there, a dull ache, but the curiosity, the pull she'd felt at 30,000 feet, was stronger. One date, she said. Yejun's entire body seemed to relax, a visible exhale of relief. Thank you. I'll have the car. No, she interrupted, pointing a finger at him. My terms. No private jets, no 5-star penthouses, no bodyguards lurking in the shadows, no chairman nonsense. If you want to know me, you have to do it in my world. We go where I want to go, and we go there like normal people. A slow, genuine smile spread across Yejun's face, the first one she'd seen that didn't have a hint of professional polish. It made his eyes crinkle at the corners, and for a second, Brittany forgot to be mad. No jets, he promised, his voice warm. No bodyguards, just me. Where are we going? Brittany stood up, tossing her empty can into the bin. I'll text you the address. And Yejun, dress down. We're not going anywhere that has a dress code. As she walked away into the Seoul night, she didn't look back, but she could feel his gaze on her. Not as a passenger, not as a project, but as the only woman who had ever dared to tell the king of the skies no. Seoul at night was a neon-drenched labyrinth, and for the first time in his life, Yejun wasn't navigating it from the back of a tinted limousine. He followed Brittany through the narrow, steam-filled alleys of Gwangjang Market. She moved with a vibrant, unyielding energy that fascinated him. She didn't look for the most expensive stall. She looked for the one with the longest line of locals and the grandmother with the sharpest eyes. You're doing it again, she said, glancing back at him as she handed a few bills to a vendor for a plate of spicy tteokbokki. Doing what? Yejun asked, trying to figure out how to hold a paper cup of fish cake broth and a wooden skewer at the same time without dropping his dignity. Studying me, like I'm a new route you're trying to map. I'm not mapping you, he said, his voice dropping into that low, intimate register that made her skin prickle. I'm wondering how I've lived in the city for 32 years and never actually seen it until I saw it through your eyes. As the night progressed, the chairman faded entirely. In a hidden vinyl bar in Icheon-dong, Brittany spent 20 minutes explaining the psychological branding behind the local craft beer labels, her eyes lighting up with professional passion. Yejun watched her, mesmerized not just by the curve of her lips, but by the sharpness of her mind. She was brilliant, bold, and entirely unimpressed by his bank account. You're a force of nature, he murmured, leaning across the small wooden table. The board of Sky K wouldn't know what hit them if you walked into that room. They'd probably just see a woman who doesn't fit the standard, she said, the smile faltering slightly. Then the standard is broken, he replied firmly. The shift in mood happened 2 weeks later at a trendy glass-walled gastropub in Hanam Dong. It was the kind of place where the it girls of Seoul gathered. Women who looked like they lived on green tea and air, dressed in head-to-toe designer labels. As Brittany and Yejun waited for their table, a group of 4 women at a nearby booth began to whisper. It wasn't quiet. They glanced at Brittany's curves, then at Yejun's striking face. Their eyes filled with a cruel, confused judgment. Is he a celebrity? One whispered in Korean, loud enough to carry. Why is he with her? She's taking up the whole hallway. Maybe she's a rich American heiress? There's no other reason. Brittany's spine stiffened. The ghost of Mark's aesthetic comment rose up, cold and suffocating. She instinctively tried to wrap her hands around herself tighter, to shrink, to become invisible. Yejun felt the shift in her immediately. He didn't look at the women with anger. Anger would give them too much credit. Instead, he looked at them with a chilling, aristocratic boredom. Then he turned to Brittany. In front of the entire crowded restaurant, Yejun took her hand. He didn't just hold it. He raised it to his lips, bowing his head with the reverence of a man honoring a queen. He lingered there, his lips pressing against her skin, his eyes locked onto hers, making the rest of the room disappear. Let's go, he whispered, his voice carrying a silken authority. I've realized I don't want to share the air in this room with people who have such small minds. You deserve a better view. He didn't let go of her hand as they walked out. He tucked her arm firmly under his, pulling her flush against his side, broadcasting to every person in that room that he wasn't just with her. He was proud to be hers. They ended up at the base of Namsan Park. The spring air was cool, and the cherry blossoms were in full, heavy bloom, appearing like pink-white clouds under the moonlight. The scent was intoxicating. They walked in silence for a while, the tension between them thickening with every step. The playfulness of the night had vanished, replaced by a gravity that pulled them toward each other. You didn't have to do that, Brittany said softly, stopping under a canopy of falling petals. The hand kiss, the queen act. I can handle mean girls, Yejun. It wasn't an act, he said, turning to face her. The shadows of the branches danced across his sharp features. I wasn't defending you, Brittany. I was showing them that I know exactly how lucky I am. I'm the one who doesn't deserve you. Brittany looked up at him. This powerful, hidden king who had spent his life in the clouds, yet seemed more grounded than anyone she'd ever known. Yejun. I've spent my life following flight paths, he whispered, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. But I have no idea where I'm going with you. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the turbulence. He leaned in, and when his lips finally met hers, it wasn't the sweet kiss of a fairy tale. It was a collision. It was beautiful, a release of all the suppressed longing from the long flight and the days of running. Yejun's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her into him as if he were trying to merge their very souls. Brittany's hands tangled in his hair, her breath hitching as the world tilted. Under the falling cherry blossoms, the pilot and the passenger were gone. There was only a man and a woman, holding on to each other as if they were the only 2 people left on Earth. The morning after the cherry blossoms felt like a dream, until the world woke up and turned on its phone. By 9 a.m., the pilot air was the #1 trending topic on every Korean social media portal. The grainy, romantic photos of Yejun kissing Brittany's hand at the restaurant and their silhouette under the cherry blossoms had gone viral. The headlines were relentless. Sky K Air's mystery woman, a new standard of beauty for the chairman, and is this the PR move to save the airline? Brittany sat in her boutique hotel room, the glow of the previous night curdling in her stomach. She was staring at her phone when it vibrated with a call that made her breath hitch. It wasn't Yejun. It was a New York area code she had blocked months ago. She shouldn't have answered, but the ghost of her past was persistent. I see you found a new way to get attention, Britt. Mark's voice crackled through the line, smooth and condescending as ever. How did you get this number, Mark? Brittany's voice was like stone. I have my ways. Look, I'm calling because I'm worried about you. I know how you get. You're vulnerable, you're in a foreign country, and you've fallen for the oldest trick in the book. I don't know what you're talking about. Mark chuckled, a sound that used to mean love but now felt like a scalpel. Brittany, honey, he's a Chaebol. His family's airline is in the middle of a massive scandal. His cousin was just arrested. Don't you see? He needs a relatable distraction. He needs a story that makes him look like a man of the people, a man who loves real women. He paused, letting the poison sink in. A man like Yejun doesn't marry a woman who looks like you for love. He uses her for the optics. Once the board meeting is over and the stock prices stabilize, he'll find a reason to let you go. He'll find someone who fits the aesthetic. Don't let him make a fool of you on a global stage. Go to hell, Mark, Brittany snapped and hung up. But the seed was planted. It was a weed with deep, old roots. She looked at the photos online again. She saw her own curves next to Yejun's sharp, perfect profile. She saw the comments section. Some were supportive, but others were cruel, calling her the PR girlfriend. Placeholder. The word flashed in her mind like a warning light in a cockpit. For the next few days, Brittany became a ghost. She ignored Yejun's texts. She declined his calls. When he sent a card to her hotel, she told the concierge to send it away. Every time she thought about him, she saw Mark's face. She saw the save the date card. She saw the inevitable moment when Yejun would realize he was bored and move on to a woman who didn't cause a scandal just by existing. The Sky K Foundation Gala was the event of the season. It was Yejun's official debut as the undisputed chairman. He had sent Brittany a dress, a deep emerald silk gown that was modest yet breathtaking, along with a note. I don't care about the cameras. I only want you there so I have someone real to look at. Please. Brittany dressed. She did her makeup. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who looked like she belonged at a palace. Then she saw the PR headline on her laptop screen. The emerald dress hit the floor in a heap of silk. She couldn't do it. She couldn't be the relatable prop in his victory lap. She turned off the lights, curled into her bed in an oversized t-shirt, and listened to the rain begin to lash against the window. 2 hours later, a thunderous pounding at her door startled her out of a fitful sleep. Brittany, open this door. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Brittany scrambled out of bed, her heart racing. She opened the door, and the breath left her lungs. Yejun was standing in the hallway. He wasn't the polished chairman. He was wearing his tuxedo, but the jacket was gone. His white shirt was translucent, soaked through by the torrential Seoul rain. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his chest was heaving. He looked like a man who had run through a battlefield. What are you doing here? She whispered. The gala. The gala is nothing, he roared, stepping into the room and kicking the door shut behind him. He was vibrating with a mix of fury and agony. I spent 4 hours watching the door, Brittany. 4 hours wondering if you were hurt, if you were in danger, if you had finally decided to leave the country without a word. I didn't want to be your PR stunt, Yejun, she said, her voice cracking as she backed away. I talked to Mark. I saw the news. I know how this works. You're the king of the skies, and I'm just the girl who makes you look approachable for the shareholders. Once they're happy, what happens to me? Yejun stopped. The anger in his eyes vanished, replaced by a devastating raw pain. He walked toward her, and even though she wanted to run, she stayed. He reached out, his hands cold and wet as they cupped her face. "You think I went through the rain for a PR stunt?" he asked, his voice a broken whisper. "You think I stood up to the entire board for optics?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," she cried, the tears finally falling. "I'm tired of being the girl men are ashamed of when the cameras are off." Yejun leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I am not men, Brittany. And if the world wants to watch us, let them. Let them see that the chairman of Sky K is a man who can't function because the only woman he loves won't look at him." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. "Why are you giving up on us? Why are you letting a ghost from your past win? Look at me, Brittany. Not the chairman, not the pilot, just me." The rain outside was a roar, but the silence in the room was louder. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted, his thumb brushing away a tear. "But I'd rather crash with you than fly with anyone else. Now tell me, are you done pushing me away? Because I'm not leaving this room until you remember who we are." The morning lightened soul was gray and heavy, but the air inside Brittany's hotel room was still charged with the electric aftermath of the previous night's rain. Yejun had stayed, sleeping in the armchair by her bed, guarding her even in his dreams. But the peace was shattered by a notification, then 100. Junho, released on bail and desperate to burn the kingdom he couldn't rule, had struck. A notorious tabloid had released a special report titled "The Weight of Ambition: How an American Executive Seduced the Sky K Heir." The article was a masterpiece of misogyny and racism. It featured insider quotes from Junho, claiming Brittany had targeted Yejun on the flight, using her marketing skills to manipulate his emotions. It cruelly analyzed her body, her background, and her fitness to stand beside a Korean icon. Brittany sat on the edge of the bed, her phone trembling in her hand. The old wounds didn't just sting, they bled. "He's doing it, Yejun," she whispered, her voice hollow. "He's making me a spectacle. I'm just a headline to them." Yejun, already awake and alert, crossed the room in 2 strides. He took the phone from her hand and threw it onto the duvet without looking at it. His eyes were dark, a predatory stillness settling over him. "He wants a spectacle?" Yejun's voice was a low, dangerous vibration. "I will give him one he will never forget. At 2 p.m., every screen in South Korea, from the giant billboards in Gangnam to the smartphones in the subways, cut to a breaking news announcement." Chairman Yejun stood in the center of the Sky K press room. He wasn't behind a podium. He stood front and center, his hands in his pockets, wearing a black turtleneck and a tailored coat. He looked like a man who owned the air itself. "I am not here to issue a statement," Yejun began, staring directly into the lens. His gaze was so intense, it felt like he was looking into the soul of every viewer. "I am here to correct a narrative." He paused, his jaw tightening. There are cowards who use words like seduction and manipulation because they cannot understand a woman whose worth isn't measured by their narrow standards. They see Brittany Williams and they see a passenger. I see a brilliant mind that makes my board of directors look like children. The room was pin-drop silent. "She is not my distraction," Yejun said, his voice dropping into a register of ironclad certainty. "She is my muse. She is the standard by which I now measure my life. And to those who question her place as Sky K, know this: she is the future of this company. If you disrespect her, you are disrespecting me. And I have very little patience for those who cannot see the sun while it's shining on them." When Yejun returned that evening, the world outside was in an uproar, but the world inside was quiet. Brittany stood by the window watching the city lights. When she heard the door, she didn't turn. She couldn't. The weight of his public confession was almost too much to carry. Yejun didn't say a word. He walked up behind her, his heat radiating through her silk robe. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, his face buried in the crook of her neck. "You meant it," she breathed, her eyes closing. "On national TV, you chose me." "I chose you the moment you told me to get out of your way at the airport," he murmured, his hands moving slowly, possessively over her curves. He turned her around, his eyes burning with a fire that had nothing to do with anger. He began to kiss her, not with desperation, but with a slow, worshipful intent. He traced the lines of her body with his hands as if he were memorizing a sacred text. In the bedroom, the tension that had been building since Flight SK-001 finally snapped. Yejun was a man of precision in the cockpit and power in the boardroom, but with Brittany, he was a man undone. He worshipped every inch of her, his touch a silent rebuttal to every insult she had ever endured. He made her feel not just seen, but cherished, a queen whose beauty was undisputed in the only kingdom that mattered, his arms. "You are perfect," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick with a raw, honest hunger. "Every part of you. Never doubt that again." The next morning, the sun was bright and unforgiving. They were tangled in the sheets, the remnants of the night still lingering in the air, when a sharp, rhythmic knock sounded at the door. Yejun groaned, pulling a robe on and heading to the door. Standing there was a man in a traditional high-collared suit. He held a black envelope embossed with a gold phoenix, the seal of the Sky K founding family. "Chairman," the man said, bowing low, "the matriarch has returned from her retreat in Jeju. She has seen the broadcast." Yejun's face went pale. His grandmother was the only person in the world he feared, a woman who had built the airline with his father from the ruins of war, with a heart of flint. "She requests an audience," the messenger continued, his eyes flicking momentarily toward the bedroom where Brittany was sitting up. "She wishes to meet the woman who has stole the heart of the Sky K air and set the nation on fire. You are expected for tea at the estate. 1 hour." Yejun closed the door and leaned against it, his eyes meeting Brittany's. The battle with Junho was over, but the war for their future had just moved to the palace. Brittany wore a tailored suit of charcoal wool, her hair swept back into a sleek professional knot. Beside her, Yejun was uncharacteristically tense. He hadn't let go of her hand since they left the car. "My grandmother doesn't raise her voice," he warned quietly as they walked through the manicured rock garden. "She doesn't need to. She moves the world with a whisper." "I've dealt with predatory CEOs and hostile takeovers, Yejun," Brittany said, though her heart was drumming against her ribs. "I can handle tea." They were ushered into a minimalist room overlooking a koi pond. Sitting on a silk cushion was Madame Park. She was a woman who appeared to be made of porcelain and iron, her silver hair coiled tightly, her handbag impeccable. She didn't look up as they entered. She was focused entirely on the ritual of the tea. "Sit," the matriarch commanded. The silence stretched for several minutes, the only sound the pouring of water. Finally, Madame Park lifted her gaze. Her eyes were sharp, evaluating Brittany not as a guest, but as a balance sheet. "You have caused quite a stir, Ms. Williams," the matriarch began, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "In my day, a chairman's private life was private. Now, I see my grandson on the news talking about muses and futures. It is untidy." "Honesty is rarely tidy, Madame Park," Brittany replied, keeping her voice steady. "Honesty is a luxury for those who don't have a legacy to protect." The matriarch reached into the sleeve of her handbag and pulled out a slip of paper. She slid it across the low table. It was a bank draft. "This is for the inconvenience our family has caused you. The press, the stress, the loss of your anonymity. It is a generous sum, more than enough to restart your life in New York, perhaps even start your own firm." Yejun's jaw tightened. "Grandmother, enough." "Let her speak, Yejun," the matriarch snapped. She looked back at Brittany. You are a smart woman. You know how this ends. The scandal will fade, the novelty will wear off, and my grandson will realize that a bird of paradise cannot live in a nest built for eagles. Take the exit while it is still profitable. Brittany looked down at the check. The number was staggering. 7 figures in USD. It was the kind of money that could change a life. The old Brittany, the one who had been told she wasn't enough by Mark, might have felt insulted, but the woman who had stood on a plane and held the gaze of a king felt something else entirely. Amusement. Brittany reached out, her fingers brushing the paper. She didn't pick it up. She simply slid it back across the table toward the matriarch with the tip of her index finger. It's a lovely gesture, Madame Park, Brittany said, her voice dropping into a cool, executive tone. But I think you've been misinformed about my worth. My current marketing contracts in the US and Europe are public record. I make more in a quarter than you're offering me to leave. The matriarch's eyebrows arched. A flicker of something, not quite anger, but surprise, crossed her face. I'm not here for Sky K's money, Brittany continued, leaning forward, her presence filling the small room. And I'm not here for a fairy tale. I'm here because your grandson is a man who spent his life hiding in the clouds because the people on the ground were too busy bowing to him to actually look him in the eye. I'm here because he's finally found someone who isn't afraid of his title. And more importantly, someone who isn't afraid of you. Yejun exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding since the airport. He looked at Brittany with a raw, terrifyingly intense pride. The matriarch stared at Brittany for a long, agonizing minute. The tension in the room was brittle, ready to shatter. Then, slowly, the corners of the old woman's mouth twitched. She picked up the check, tore it in half, and dropped it into the waste bin. Finally, the matriarch murmured, a small, genuine smile breaking through her frost. Finally, a woman with a backbone. My grandson has spent 30 years surrounded by yes men and gold diggers. I was beginning to think he lacked the taste to find a real partner. She poured a fresh cup of tea and pushed it toward Brittany. Drink. We have much to discuss regarding the brand's fourth quarter recovery. I expect your brilliant mind to be at my disposal. As they left the estate an hour later, the sun setting over the mountains, Yejun pulled Brittany into his arms behind the stone wall of the gate. He kissed her with the ferocity that left her breathless, his hands trembling slightly against her waist. I thought I loved you on the plane, he whispered against her lips. I thought I loved you in the rain. But watching you stare down the most powerful woman in Korea? Brittany, I'm never letting you go. You're not just the future of Sky K. You're the only world I want to live in. The morning of the Sky K Sovereign launch was supposed to be a triumph. The new fleet represented everything Yejun wanted for the company. Safety, innovation, and a departure from the corrupt old guard represented by his cousin. But as the sun rose over the Incheon tarmac, the air felt thick with more than just humidity. A whispered report had leaked to the press. An anonymous whistleblower claimed the flight control software of the new fleet was compromised. The stock price was in a free fall, and the board members, even those who had bowed to Brittany 2 days prior, were beginning to panic. It's Junho, Yejun said, his voice a low snarl as he stared at the diagnostic screens in the private hangar. He's trying to kill the company from the outside. The sensors are showing a phantom glitch, the lead engineer stammered. No pilot will touch it, Chairman. The risk of a total systems lockout at 10,000 feet is too high. We have to cancel the launch. If we cancel, the company dies today, Yejun replied. He looked at the sleek silver bird sitting in the hangar. Then he looked at Brittany. She was standing by the hangar doors, her eyes wide. She knew that look. It was the look of a captain who was about to enter a storm. You aren't going up there, Brittany said, her voice trembling as she followed him into the dressing room. Yejun stopped, his hand hovering over his flight suit. I designed the specs for this plane, Brittany. If there is a glitch, I'm the only one who can feel it in the yoke. If the chairman won't trust the product, why should the world? You're not just the chairman. You're the man I... She caught herself, the word love hanging heavy in the air. I just got you. Don't do this. Yejun stepped close, his hands framing her face. He was dressed in his flight suit, the fabric crisp, his presence radiating an absolute leonine calm. I am a pilot, Brittany. I was a pilot before I was a CEO, and I'll be one after. Trust the man you met in seat 1A. He kissed her, a hard, final press of lips that tasted of salt and adrenaline. Outside, the press gathered like vultures. Brittany stood at the edge of the tarmac, her knuckles white as she gripped the railing. She watched as the Sky K Sovereign taxied out. The engines roared, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in her chest. The plane took off, a silver needle piercing the gray morning sky. For 40 minutes, the world held its breath. Every few minutes, Yejun's voice crackled over the hangar speakers, calm and professional, reporting his altitude and airspeed. Suddenly, the speakers hissed with static. Control, I have a primary flight display failure. Yejun's voice remained steady, but the urgency was there. Switching to manual. The software is being bypassed. Someone is trying to override the stabilizers from a remote terminal. Brittany's heart stopped. She looked at the security monitors in the corner. Director Kang, she shouted. Check the auxiliary server room in Hangar 4. If someone is overriding, they have to be on the local network. While Yejun wrestled the massive aircraft through a series of terrifying stalls and recoveries in the sky, Sky K security, led by a tip from Brittany's keen observation, swarmed the old maintenance shed. They found him. Junho was hunched over a ruggedized laptop, his face lit by the blue glare of code, his eyes bloodshot and unhinged. He was mid-keystroke, trying to force deploy the landing gear at high speed to tear the plane apart. I'll kill him, Junho screamed as security tackled him to the oily floor. If I can't have the chair, he can have the coffin. The signal was cut. On the runway, the Sovereign appeared through the clouds. It was coming in too fast, its nose dipping dangerously. Brittany didn't breathe. She prayed to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. The tires hit the tarmac with a puff of white smoke. The engines roared into reverse thrust. The plane slowed, shuddering, until it came to a perfect, elegant stop right in front of the gathered press. The stairs lowered. Yejun emerged, his flight suit stained with sweat, his hair a mess. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the board members who were already cheering. He looked at Brittany. As the police led a raving, broken Junho away in shackles, this time with no bail and a mountain of federal sabotage charges, Yejun walked straight to Brittany and collapsed his forehead against her shoulder. Later that night, the hangar was empty. The stars were visible through the skylights, and the smell of jet fuel and expensive champagne lingered. Yejun sat on a flight crate, his chairman's tie discarded on the floor. Brittany stood between his knees, her fingers running through his hair, soothing the tension away. The board wants a press conference tomorrow, she whispered. The stock is up 20%. You're a national hero, Yejun. You saved the empire. Yejun looked up at her, his eyes weary but clear. I don't want the empire, Brittany. She froze. What do you mean? I sent my resignation to my grandmother an hour ago, he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn pilot's logbook. I'm appointing Director Kang as acting chairman. I've realized that I hate the view from the boardroom. I only feel alive when I'm at 30,000 feet, and when I'm with you. He took her hands in his. I'm going back to the cockpit. I want to fly the long-haul routes. I want to see the world without having to sign for it. He paused, his gaze intensifying. But a captain is nothing without his North Star. I'm resigning from the company, Brittany, but I'm applying for a permanent position in your life. I want to fly, but only if you're on the plane with me. Every time. No more placeholders. No secrets. Brittany felt the last of her walls crumble into the dust of the hangar floor. You're giving up a kingdom for a cockpit? I'm giving up a cage for the sky, he corrected. What do you say? Ready for a life with a little more turbulence? Brittany laughed through her tears, pulling him up into a kiss that tasted like the future. Clear for takeoff, Captain. The sky was no longer just a workplace for Yejun. It had become the only place where the world felt right. 1 month after the chaos of the boardrooms and the betrayal of the tabloids, the dust had finally settled. Yejun had officially stepped down as chairman, handing the reins to a reformed board. But he kept one piece of the empire, a custom-fitted Sky K long-range private jet. Where are we going, Yejun? Brittany asked, laughing as he led her up the airstrip. She was wearing a silk slip dress the color of the midnight sky, her hair soft and cascading over her shoulders. Just a sunset tour, he said, his eyes sparkling with a secret. I told you, I wanted to show you the world from my perspective. No corporate agendas, just the horizon. The takeoff was effortless. As the jet climbed through the layers of clouds, the cabin was flooded with the amber and violet hues of the Korean sunset. This wasn't the first-class cabin of a commercial flight. It was a sanctuary of cream leather, fresh white lilies, and the faint, comforting scent of the roasted grain tea they had shared in the dark weeks ago. Yejun was in the cockpit for the first 20 minutes. Brittany watched through the open door as his hands moved with practiced grace over the controls. He looked happy, truly happy. Autopilot is engaged. Co-pilot Minho has the comms, Yejun announced, stepping back into the cabin. He had removed his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up, looking every bit the man she had fallen for at 30,000 feet. He didn't sit in the seat opposite her. Instead, he took her hands and led her to the large observation window where the sun was dipping below a sea of golden clouds. The day we met, Yejun began, his voice low and steady. You were sad over a man who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. You told me you were a placeholder. You told me you were the girl men stayed with until they found their perfect trophy. Brittany's breath hitched. The memory of that pain felt a lifetime away, but the scar was still there. Yejun turned her to face him. The golden light caught the tears shimmering in her eyes. I've spent my life looking at maps, Brittany, looking for destinations, looking for the next port, the next city, the next milestone. But since the moment I saw you in seat 1A, I stopped looking at the map. He reached into his pocket, his gaze never leaving hers. You told me you were a placeholder, he repeated, dropping to one knee as the jet leveled out at peak altitude. I'm here to tell you that you are the destination. You are the home I never thought I'd find. I don't want a perfect life defined by boardrooms and aesthetics. I want a life that is loud and brave and real. I want a life with you. He opened a small velvet box. Inside sat a pear-cut canary diamond, surrounded by a halo of rose gold wings. It was massive, a stone that didn't just dwarf the ring she had thrown away, but seemed to radiate a light of its own. It was bold. It was unapologetic. It was exactly like her. Brittany Williams, Yejun whispered, will you fly with me for the rest of our lives? Not as a passenger, not as a muse, but as my wife? Brittany looked from the ring to the man who had risked everything, his title, his safety, and his family's legacy, just to make sure she knew she was worthy. Yes, she choked out, a sob of pure joy escaping her. 1,000 times. Yes. Yejun slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood and pulled her into a kiss that felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Outside the window, the sun finally disappeared, leaving behind a trail of stars that seemed to belong only to them. The private jet surged forward, its silver wings catching the last of the light as it headed into the vast golden horizon. Brittany's voice echoed, no longer filled with the hurt of the past, but with the quiet power of a woman who knew exactly who she was. I spent so long waiting for someone to give me a seat at the table. I spent so long believing that if I wasn't perfect, I wasn't worthy of the fairy tale. I stopped believing in fairy tales the day I was told I didn't fit the part. Until I realized I was the one writing the ending. And it turns out, the view from the top is much better when you're flying with the man who saw you before you even saw yourself. The end. Thank you for watching. If you love this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional twists and character-driven plots. And if you're ready for the next story, make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep believing in love that defies all odds.